Hello, my name is Chris Douglas. I am a past master of Ocean View Lodge number 335, Ancient, Free, and Accepted Masons, under the Grand Lodge of Virginia. I have served as Lodge Educational Officer and Lodge Instructor of Work. The purpose of this video is to explain various terms related to recognition and amity among Grand Lodges, to hope to create a better understanding of how recognition occurs between our various jurisdictions. You may have already noticed my logo, YJMV, which means your jurisdiction may vary. Simply put, what I do in my Grand Lodge and what we consider to be common practice may vary quite a bit from what you do in your Grand Lodge. It doesn't mean that I'm right and you're wrong. It just means that every jurisdiction does things just a little bit different. And we are discussing things online with people in other jurisdictions. We always need to keep that in mind. Thus, I've adopted it as the logo for this series of videos. Your jurisdiction may vary. Of course, I need to explain what a jurisdiction or Grand Lodge is, but to do so, first I have to define what a Blue Lodge is. A Blue Lodge, or Symbolic Lodge, or Craft Lodge, is a certain number of Masons gathered together with a Holy Bible, square and compasses, and a charter or warrant from some Grand Lodge empowering them to work. The lodge that you attend regularly is a Blue Lodge. It must belong to a larger organization known as a Grand Lodge. The person who presides over your Blue Lodge is the worshipful master, while the person who presides over the Grand Lodge is the Grand Master, and both of them have absolute authority over their organization, and they sometimes overlap. A Grand Lodge is the governing body over a jurisdiction, either a country or a state. The Grand Lodge, governed by a Grand Master, has absolute authority over all the Blue Lodges within its jurisdiction. Amity, or recognition, is the term to explain how two sovereign Grand Lodges recognize each other. The two of them agree that both Grand Lodges are regular, they follow the ancient landmarks, and that their members have the right of visitation between the two bodies. To explain this, we need to go back in history a little bit. In 1717, there were 4 Masonic lodges that met in the city of London. These 4 lodges came forward and announced that they were forming a Grand Lodge to govern all Masonic lodges within the jurisdiction of England. From that moment forward, no new Masonic lodge could be formed without the permission of the Grand Lodge of England. Shortly thereafter, the Grand Lodges of Ireland and Scotland came into being. And these Grand Lodges all communicated with each other and agreed that the 3 of them would have fraternal recognition of each other and would consider each of the other Grand Lodges to be regular, the same as themselves. Prior to the Revolutionary War, there were lodges in the colony of Virginia that were chartered under the Grand Lodges of England, Ireland, and Scotland. These were all regular lodges. But following the Revolutionary War, 6 of them decided to form a new Grand Lodge within the jurisdiction of Virginia, and did so. They then reestablished fraternal relations with their mother Grand Lodges, so that a Mason raised in a lodge in Virginia would have the right to travel to England, Scotland, or Ireland and attend lodge there. They were not the first colony to do so, but within a few years, all of the 13 colonies, now states of the United States, were each their own Grand Lodge and were recognized by the Grand Lodges they came from. They also extended fraternal relations to all the other states within the Union. So a Mason could travel to any other state within the United States and attend lodge because all of the Grand Lodges recognized each other. Here is an example of amity. It may not be historically accurate, but it is simply an example. You have the Grand Lodge of Virginia and the Grand Lodge of North Carolina. Both have recently been formed. Both of them have established fraternal relations with the Grand Lodge of England. A Mason for Virginia may travel to England and sit in lodge with a brother from North Carolina, but he cannot travel to North Carolina and sit in lodge there. Why? Because Virginia and North Carolina have not recognized each other. So to reconcile this, the Grand Lodge of North Carolina sends a letter to the Grand Lodge of Virginia asking for fraternal recognition. Once both Grand Lodges have agreed to amity between the two, a Mason may freely travel from Virginia to North Carolina and attend lodge there. This is how amity works among regular Grand Lodges and how it has always worked between sovereign jurisdictions. So at this point you may say, okay, I understand. There are 51 Grand Lodges in America, one for each state and one for the District of Columbia, and all of them recognize each other, and we all recognize England, and everybody gets along, and that's clear cut, right? Every state has its own Grand Lodge and everything is simple. Well, not exactly. See, in the late 1700s, shortly before the Revolutionary War, there was a man named Prince Hall, a freeborn man who was from the West Indies, thus he was black. He and 14 other men were raised in a military lodge in Massachusetts under the Grand Lodge of England. They soon formed their own lodge, Africa Lodge number 459, and received a charter from the Grand Lodge of England, at first a limited one, and then eventually a full-on charter where they could make new Masons. These were all regular Masons who just happened to be black. After the Revolutionary War, when everyone broke off ties with England, and then we decided to go back and reestablish fraternal relations with our mother Grand Lodges, they conveniently decided that, well, we're just not going to recognize this Africa Lodge, which means you had a whole number of regular made Masons who were black, who were members of this lodge along with Prince Hall, and they were not recognized by the Grand Lodge of England, and they were not recognized by the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. They weren't recognized by anyone. So what Prince Hall decided to do was just keep going. They chartered a Grand Lodge called the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And then they did what we call mainstream Grand Lodges did. They chartered new lodges, they established new Grand Lodges within each jurisdiction, and over a period of almost 200 years, Prince Hall Masons created their own Grand Lodges right alongside the mainstream or state Grand Lodges. So now we're well into the 20th century, and we have two Grand Lodges in nearly every state. They don't recognize each other. England only recognizes the mainstream Grand Lodges. Well, finally in the 1960s, the Grand Lodge of England recognized Prince Hall. And over the last 20 years or so, all of the, or most of the mainstream or state Grand Lodges have decided to recognize their Prince Hall counterparts. That is why we have 2 Grand Lodges in most of the states in this country. So at this point, I need to explain a term that I've used a few times: regular as opposed to irregular Masonry. A regular Masonic Lodge or Grand Lodge is one that follows the ancient landmarks established by other regular Grand Lodges. All of the Grand Lodges in America that are recognized by the Grand Lodge of England have established themselves as being regular. They follow the ancient landmarks. The ancient landmarks is a topic unto itself, but basically these are the rules that every lodge can said to follow, such as there must be a Grand Master who is sovereign over his Grand Lodge. There must be a master and wardens of each Blue Lodge, and so forth. Not all jurisdictions observe exactly the same ancient landmarks, but when one Grand Lodge is considering another Grand Lodge for fraternal recognition, they look to see if they are regular. If they don't meet a sufficient number of these ancient landmarks, whatever the criteria is within each Grand Lodge, then that Grand Lodge is considered to be irregular and not following the same rules of Masonry as the regular lodges. Now I need to explain a couple of other terms that you may have heard used. First is clandestine. Clandestine simply means if you are a member of a Grand Lodge that my Grand Lodge does not yet recognize, you are clandestine to me. This is not a pejorative. This is not a negative statement. It does not even necessarily mean that you are not a regular Grand Lodge. But by definition, every lodge, every Grand Lodge that my Grand Lodge does not recognize is clandestine to us. So for example, the Grand Lodge Prince Hall of North Carolina may be regular. They may be recognized by the Grand Lodge of North Carolina. And we may recognize the Grand Lodge of North Carolina. But if we do not recognize the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of North Carolina, they are clandestine to us, and we may not visit them. Now, bogus is an unofficial term, as far as I know. I don't think any Grand Lodge defines the term bogus. It is an informal term used among Masons to describe a group that is passing itself off as a Masonic body when they are clearly not. An organization that is usually started by a Mason or a expelled Mason or someone who never was a Mason, who simply copied all of our ritual and made up his own rules and called himself a Grand Lodge, is recognized as being bogus. So this question gets asked a lot. Why don't we recognize Prince Hall? Well, as I've attempted to lay out in this video, every Grand Lodge is sovereign unto itself. No Grand Lodge can tell another Grand Lodge what to do or who they need to recognize. In an ideal world, all of the Prince Hall Grand Lodges would recognize all of the mainstream or state Grand Lodges within the United States, and we'd all be one big happy family. That has not yet happened. Until a Grand Lodge petitions my Grand Lodge for recognition, they will be clandestine to us, period. There is no automatic blanket recognition. If an individual Grand Lodge chooses to issue a blanket recognition of anyone claiming to be a Grand Lodge, that's their right, but that's not how the majority of us conduct ourselves. So you still have a few states in the United States, mostly in the South, that simply do not recognize their Prince Hall counterpart. They may have actually been approached, and for their own unfortunate racist reasons, they have chosen not to recognize them. That's their fault. I can't control what that Grand Lodge does. I can't even control what my own Grand Lodge does. So why wouldn't we recognize them? Is because they haven't asked. So the only thing I can suggest to everyone out there who believes in bringing all of the Masons of the world together is encourage your Grand Lodge to petition every Grand Lodge out there that we know of to be regular, that is recognized by their state counterpart, and ask them to recognize us. And maybe we can bring all of us together and be one united but distinct and sovereign group of Grand Lodges throughout this country, but united in our fraternal recognition and amity with each other. My final thought as I wrap up this video. In researching this topic, I began to catalog all of the Grand Lodges throughout the world that are recognized by one or more regular Grand Lodges, and I've done my best to capture them all. It is an ongoing project, and I don't have all of the Amity links between each one of them, but I have made some progress in showing all of the Grand Lodge websites, if they have a lodge locator page, and if they list the lodges, the Grand Lodges they are in amity with. I hope this is useful to you. I provided this link on my final slide, and I hope you all check it out and take a look at what Grand Lodges your Grand Lodge recognizes, and hope you find it of some value. Thank you.